Now, so 1830, right? We're out of debt. And Congress gets a bright idea, because that's what Congress does. They come up with bright ideas. They just sit back there and cook stuff up. Here's what they come up with. We have no debt, because remember the two purposes: pay the debt, create new states. No other use or purpose. They said, okay, we have no debt, so we'll create new states, but if we sell the land, we'll just keep the money. And if the states do what we want, we'll give them some money. Does that sound familiar? So that actually passes the House, and it passes the Senate, and it runs into President Andrew Jackson. And he vetoes the bill. And here's what he says about it. Now, out in the lobby, I've got thumb drives that have about 2,000 pages. It's a book, right? You can do books on a thumb drive, so you guys can print it. I don't have to print it. But there's a book on the thumb drive, and they're $25. They're out there. I got another little book that I wrote on the powers of the states to restore balance in our system. That's out there. But on there, you've got this Andrew Jackson veto statement and a whole bunch of other information. This is the single best contemporaneous history on why the federal government held public lands and what it's supposed to do with them. He vetoes that bill, and here's what he says. It's the real interest of each and all the states in the Union, and particularly the new states. Who's he talking about, the new states? Illinois and Arkansas and Florida and Louisiana, right? Because they're still holding 90% of their land. That the price of these lands shall be reduced and graduated, and after they've been offered for a certain number of years, the refuse remaining unsold shall be abandoned to the states, and the machinery of our land system entirely withdrawn. What would that look like today? Right? That was the whole purpose. He says, it cannot be supposed that the compacts, right, going back to 1780 when they did the resolution and then the states ceded their land, it cannot be supposed that the compacts intended the United States should forever retain a title to lands within the states which are of no value. And no doubt is entertained that the general interest, the interest of the whole nation, is best promoted by surrendering those lands to the states. See, that's the system. That was the deal. That's the trust agreement. But rights we don't know are no better than rights we don't have. Right? That's why step one, education. We've got to get educated. And then we've got to go out and educate others. And what are we going to do? Hire and inspire leaders to battle for the only solution big enough, which is keep your promise. Because this doesn't make any sense. This is not our nation. This violates those very principles that get us to peace and prosperity. Let's get back to the principles, right? So much other. There's congressional record that says the same thing. The states will for many generations be retarded in their endeavors to increase their comfort and wealth because they have not the power incident to all sovereign states of taxing the soil. When these states stipulated not to tax the lands of the United States until they were sold, they rested upon the implied engagement of Congress to cause them to be sold within a reasonable time. You know what I learned the first week of contract law in law school? First week of contract law, they say you need 3 things for a contract. Party, price, and subject matter. Don't need time. You don't need to have time for a valid contract. Because if you don't have time, the law presumes a reasonable time. Just like they said. The states rested upon the implied engagement of Congress to cause them to be sold within a reasonable time. They didn't put in the Constitution, Congress shall have the power to dispose of these lands in 10 years, because land is different everywhere you go. But what they assumed was Congress was going to act in good faith as a trustee, which is the duty of a trustee, and they dispose of them in a reasonable time. Just like the congressional record says when Illinois and Missouri and Arkansas were battling for this. Missouri here says that not disposing of the land, it's an infringement of the compact between the United States and this state. If it had been understood by the contracting parties that a system would be pursued which would prevent 9/10 of the lands of these states from ever becoming property in the hands of whose persons they might be taxed, we never would have consented to this. Right? Missouri was 90% federally controlled for decades. They said, we never agreed that you never dispose, therefore we can never tax. Do you suppose Arizona agreed to that at statehood? No. That's what people will tell you. Oh, you guys didn't want your land. The founders of your state didn't want your land. Founders of Utah didn't want your land. You just didn't want it. You didn't understand the value of property in 1912. Does that make any sense? That's what people will say. That's the argument, is they didn't want the land. They bargained it away. They gave it up for the privilege of being a state that's 60% federally controlled. Do you think the people in 1912 would have done that? Of course not. Think the people in 1896? Of course not. But these are the arguments. So we've got to understand, if we believe that restoring those principles, and if we believe, let me just stop here for a second. Think about this for just a second. Imagine with me for a second, there's 100, let's pull this one up right here. Look at that bottom map on this one. You see that bottom map? $150 trillion in mineral value. 150 trillion locked up in federally controlled lands. Now come back here with me. Imagine with me for a second that we succeed like Illinois and Missouri and Arkansas and Louisiana succeeded. What difference would that make to Arizona? What difference would that make to the West? What difference would it make to the nation? What difference would it make to the world? That we restore the principles that unleash peace and prosperity. What difference would that make? So, if this only happens by the consent of the governed, and we're consenting to what's happening right now, I believe, my friends, that we're going to be accountable. Particularly now, I've just cursed you with information. I'm going to curse you with some more. We're going to be accountable for what we do with this. Because we can't point to anybody else and say, doggone it, those rat buggers. Because where's the power? Right here. Right here. This is Utah Senate Joint Memorial. I'm going to show you some really cool Arizona stuff here in just a second. By 1915, so Utah's made a state in 1896. By 1915, our legislature is passing a resolution, and there's resolutions like this in all kinds of other states. And they said, wait a minute, we believe we need to go back to this system of disposing of the public land that has done more for increasing the wealth of our nation than any other policy that's ever been out there. And then they come back and they say, we view with alarm and apprehension that you're not disposing of the land. And then, oh, shoot. Oh, right here. And then they say that in harmony with the spirit and the letter of the land grants to the national government. When did that happen? Remember our history lesson? When did the states grant the land to the national government? Remember back in 1780? So in the resolution, Utah in 1915 says, in harmony with the spirit and letter of those land grants to the national government by the states, and in conformity with the terms of our Enabling Act. And this is important because we're going to start talking about these Enabling Act terms in just a second. In conformity with the terms of our Enabling Act, we hereby urge the President and Congress for a speedy return to the liberal policy of disposing of these lands, for the upbuilding of our state and to the strength of the nation. I'm going to show you some Arizona stuff that's going to knock your socks off right here. In fact, before I come here, we'll go here. So now we're in 1915, right? Arizona's a state in 1912. We're in 1915, 1932. So by the 1920s, the states, the lower 48 are all in now, right? And they're saying, come on, you got to dispose of our land. And what the states were hearing from the bureaucrats was, yeah, we know we got to dispose of the land, but your land is arid, and so it's going to take longer. Now, let me just stop for a second. I want you to think of a concept here. Dispose. The word dispose or extinguish title, which is another word that's used, that's a big subject. That means get rid of title, right? So this is dispose. Within dispose, you have sell. Sell is a subset of dispose. Does that make sense? Right? Their duty is this. Dispose, get rid of title, right? If you sell, that's one way of disposing, okay? So what they said was, it's too hard to sell your land because it's arid. What's their duty? Dispose, right? They said it's too hard to sell, it's going to take more time. Now, being the nice guys that we are in the West, we said, okay, take a little bit of time. We'll work with you. It's governing partnership here. We're going to work with you. And then as they got into the 1920s, the states got more and more concerned. They actually compelled President Hoover to start convening a presidential commission on disposing of the public lands. That led to congressional hearings. I don't know if you can see that at the top or not. Can you see the title of that? The title of the congressional hearings in 1932, granting remaining unreserved public lands to the states. 1932, they're having congressional hearings. We know we're supposed to give the land to the states. Now the bureaus, the agencies got involved, and the agency says, okay, we got to give you the land. We're going to give you the land. We know we got to keep our promise to give you the land. We're just going to keep all the minerals. That's what they said. That's what happened. Right? So in 1932, they said, we'll give you all the land. We're just going to keep all the minerals. This is the congressional record. It's available on the website, American Lands Council website. There's all kinds of information on the website. Remember, rights we don't know are no better than rights we don't have. Right? All kinds of information on that website. This 1932 congressional record is on there. In the congressional record, my governor, Democrat George Durham from Utah, said, well, we're pleased. We appreciate the compliment that you now deem that we're grown up enough to manage our surface more wisely than the federal government. We can't help wondering why we're wise enough to manage the surface, but not the minerals. And if you take away everything that has everything of value, you leave us nothing but the skin of a squeezed lemon. And Utah and all the other western states banded together in the middle of the Depression and rejected that false promise to give us just the surface and the federal government keep all the minerals. So now if anybody tells you, and I'll tell you, my fortunately former U.S. Senator wrote an op-ed about 2 months ago saying, well, Utah can't take back the land because they never had the land. And I heard some BLM director once say that the land was offered to the states and they didn't want it. And so it was offered and they didn't take it, so they can never have it. That was an 18-year U.S. Senator. What are we missing? Remember? Knowledge and courage. We got to know this stuff. Now, I don't want to fault him too badly because he doesn't know. Now, I think you have a duty to know, but whose job is it, right? Who's the one hiring the leaders? We're the ones hiring the leaders. And so we have to hire and inspire leaders that have the knowledge and the courage to battle for property, which is where liberty comes from, which is why we're here. Right? You see how this is all fitting together? So now let me show you some out of Arizona. This is your own guy, Thomas Maddock. It's right here in this congressional record. You can find it on the website. Thomas Maddock was an original member of the Arizona legislature. He was, I think, like the chairman of the Colorado River Commission, all kinds of stuff in Arizona for a long time. But by the 1920s and 30s, he's like the expert on this stuff. And so the governors around the western states, they have Thomas Maddock from right here in Arizona coming in and telling them about what's going on and what do we need to do in these congressional hearings as they're battling to get the federal government to keep the same promise to transfer the public lands to the states. And he says, the public land question is older than our nation. We've been talking about that, haven't we? He says, the pledge of the state lands to the nation provided the security upon which Hamilton established our credit, as well as settled the overlapping claims, there's that word again, claims of the states to the territory west of the Allegheny Mountains. Remember that word claims comes back up in the Constitution, right? And he says, the federal government was intended to be merely a trustee of the lands, to sell them to settlers. And then he says, the public debt, he's quoting 1832. Remember what happened in 1832? No more debt, and Congress comes up with that bright idea. He quotes that, and he says, the public debt being now paid, the public lands are entirely released from the pledge they were under, and to that object, are free to receive a new and liberal destination for the relief of the states in which they lie. The speedy extinction. Remember, we heard that before too. That was a phrase they used over and over again. The speedy extinction of the federal title to their lands is necessary to the independence of the new states and their equality with the older states and to the development of their resources and their sovereignty. That's your guy. Thomas Maddock right here from Arizona. You see how consistent this is? From 1780 to 1784 to 1787 in the Northwest Ordinance to Article 4 of the Constitution to 1830 and Andrew Jackson in the Congressional Record and 1854 when they compelled him to transfer the land, and in conformity with our enabling acts, that's where we're going next, and in 1915 and 1932 all the way until we get to 1976.